More on politics. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has vowed to continue fighting the war on woke. The Republican spoke to about 9,000 students at Liberty University on Friday before receiving an honorary Doctorate of Humanities degree. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the governor's speech.
DeSantis called Florida a refuge of sanity and a ray of hope at a time when freedom has withered on the vine. In his view, Florida's population growth and his landslide re-election victory last year are a direct result of his fight against the so-called woke ideology.
The woke mind virus represents a war on merit. It represents a war on achievement. It's a form of cultural Marxism that seeks to use identity politics to divide Americans, but perhaps most of all, the woke represents a war on the truth.
DeSantis said it's wrong for a teacher in school to tell second graders that they may have been born in the wrong body or that their gender is a choice.
Truth is enduring. You can try to cover it up, you can try to hide it, you can try to distort it, but as time goes by, the deceit and the lies fade away, and what is true remains.
The Florida governor said since woke represents a war on truth, society must wage a war on woke. He then touched upon the founding fathers. According to DeSantis, they understood that the survival of the American experiment would require more than just a great constitution. It would require dedication to true American principles.
Our rights are not the courtesy of the government. They are the gift from Almighty God.
The Florida governor says Americans must insist on restoration of what he called time-tested constitutional principles, so that a government of by and for the people will not perish from the earth. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has a positive outlook on tackling inflation while keeping unemployment low. NTD's Daniel Monahan brings us the story.
Yellen acknowledges that an easing of stress in the labor market would help get inflation down, but says a soft landing is possible. That could be achieved by slowing down the economy just enough to keep inflation in check, but not so much that many Americans lose their jobs.
I believe a strong labor market and bringing down inflation are compatible goals.
But the Treasury Secretary told CNN that other factors have pushed inflation up besides labor market tightness. These include Russia's war in Ukraine driving food and energy prices up, and pandemic-era supply chain disruptions. Those caused key material shortages that gummed up critical pieces of the economy, like the auto industry.
We're seeing those supply chain bottlenecks that boosted inflation. They're beginning to resolve.
On lending, Yellen says banks are likely to become somewhat more cautious in the wake of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse.
That could be a substitute for further interest rate hikes that the Fed needs to make.
Meanwhile, the dollar rebounded on Monday and hit a one-month high against the yen. Positive numbers in retail sales and impressive Wall Street bank earnings raised market expectations for an interest rate hike from the Federal Reserve in May. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Joining us live to discuss this is Michael Busler, public policy analyst and professor of finance at Stockton University. Thanks for making the time today, Michael.
Well, thanks for having me, Kevin and Tiffany. As you know, it's my pleasure to be here.
And as we mentioned, the Treasury chief said a likely credit crunch would keep them from having to raise rates. Now, there is talk that May would be the last time that they would raise it for a while. What would happen if they do or if they don't?
With all due respect to Secretary Yellen, I disagree with her. She's kind of in forecasting this. You may recall back in 2021, she said the inflation is temporary, so we don't have to do much. It'll go away on its own. Obviously, that didn't happen. She also said monetary policy theory is not applicable today. We have modern monetary theory, which also turned out to be wrong. So what the Treasury Secretary is saying is the reason we really have inflation is there's excess demand in the economy, mostly caused by the federal government's excess deficit spending and by the Federal Reserve's very loose monetary policy in 2021. The interest rate hikes are supposed to reduce demand in the economy by making it more expensive to buy interest rate sensitive products like cars and houses, and also more expensive for consumers to use their credit cards. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates to try to reduce demand. She's saying that if banks tighten up their lending, that'll be enough. I don't think she's right again. I think the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates in May, and I think they're going to have to raise them one or two more times before the end of the year. I said last year when they started to raise rates that the federal funds rate is probably going to have to hit 6% to have a long-term impact on reducing inflation.
A lot of people were hoping that this would be temporary, this inflation, but it wasn't the case. What if the banks do pull back on lending? How will that impact the economy and job growth?
Well, if they pull back on lending, that means consumers won't get more credit, business won't get more credit, so that will reduce aggregate demand, and it will tend to bring the inflation rate down. I don't think it'll be enough. I think the Fed's going to have to raise interest rates. The most likely scenario, even with the banks tightening, is the Fed will raise one or two times after May and before the end of the year. I think that will lead to a slight recession, probably starting in the third quarter of this year. Now, because there's a severe labor shortage, it'll keep the recession relatively mild. Why do I say that? Typically, when we have a recession, businesses cut back on production. They lay people off. As they lay people off, people have less money to spend, and that makes the recession worse. Usually unemployment goes up significantly. Today, there are about 10 million job openings and only 6 million unemployed people. So what will happen is, as a result of that labor shortage, the unemployment rate won't go up nearly as much as it has during past recessions, and that'll keep the recession relatively mild.
Hopefully that slight recession is preventable. Now, is it nearly certain that the banks will cause this credit crunch due to the crisis, or are there any alternatives, ways to incentivize lending and the government can take other action, or is this all just inevitable?
Yeah. So they really don't want to incentivize lending because, again, if they do, that's going to increase demand in the economy, and that's going to make inflation worse. Look, inflation peaked at 9% in June. It's now down to 5%. And people are saying, well, you don't have to raise interest rates anymore. Inflation's coming down. The reason inflation came down was that China essentially shut down their economy because they had the zero COVID policy. And as a result of that, they're the second largest economy in the world. It reduced demand for energy. So energy prices fell significantly during the last half of 2022 and in the early part of 2023, which is why the inflation rate is relatively mild. However, China is back operating at full capacity. The OPEC countries, which increases demand for energy, they're going to get energy prices up. I don't know if you bought gasoline recently, but it's probably about 25, 30 cents a gallon more than you were paying last month at this time. I think that's going to trigger more inflation going forward, and the Federal Reserve is going to have to continue to tighten up with the money supply, even with the banks reducing lending, in order to really get this inflation problem down. We have to get this down too. Inflation is a cancer, and if we let it spread, it becomes very difficult to solve. So finally, in June of 2022, the Federal Reserve said price stability, reducing inflation, is our primary goal, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to reduce inflation.
Yeah, something needs to be done, and thanks for helping us look at the big picture here with some of these foreign affairs. Michael Busler, professor of finance at Stockton University, great to have your analysis.
Thank you, Kevin. Look forward to doing it again.
Just how close can you get to a bear? Well, a man in North Carolina ran into a situation that he found a bit unbearable. David Oppenheimer was relaxing outside his home last week when his motion detector sounded an alarm. He turned around and didn't see anything, but moments later, a bear was staring him right in the face. Oppenheimer grabbed a pillow, and he admits his body froze. The bear did not move toward him, and instead just ran off. Oppenheimer says this is not the first time this bear came calling. He has video of the bear sitting on his deck and eating from his bird feeder. And he said he's noticed the same bear looking through his trash cans in the past.
You know, I'm not sure who was more startled, the man or the bear. Kevin, what would you do in that situation?
Oh, I don't know. I'd probably just look out from the window and watch him eat from the bird feeder. Grab some popcorn, enjoy the show.
But if you saw a bear right behind you?
Well, I'd probably just start making some noise and shoo him off a little bit.
God.
These are dangerous animals.
Maybe you just wanted to chill with you.
Yeah, I don't want to find out.
Welcome back. A Texas high schooler was named grand champion of a renowned rodeo art show. Her artwork is a photorealistic painting of a rider on horseback herding cows. Let's take a look at her story.
Mia Huckman is an 18-year-old high schooler living in Houston, Texas. This February, she took the top spot at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo's 2023 School Art Contest. Her artwork was selected from among 4,500 submissions from school districts across Southeast Texas.
I paint like a lot of things. I do architecture, I do portraits, but rodeo art, it's always been sort of a big deal like within my school district. It's a thing that gets advertised a lot in our classes, and I just think that the scholarship money that you can win from the contest is a really big opportunity.
Huckman told NTD she has always liked art as a kid and started taking art classes when she was 8. Her winning painting, titled Our Last Roundup, is based on a photo taken at a real Texas ranch. Huckman said she started working on the painting in mid-October and finished it in early January.
I like painting portraits because I think that every portrait of a different person is obviously going to be different, and the personal connections that you can see in that kind of work is really unique.
The high schooler said there were challenges in completing the artwork and balancing her life as a student.
You get texts from your friends like, hey, let's go out for lunch, let's go out for dinner, and then of course you have to tell them, no, I'm going to paint, and it honestly sometimes feels like a little silly because nobody else has that that problem. It's just me every time. But just because it's an every year thing, then I know that at the end of the day, it's going to be like fulfilling if I can pull off the piece that I'm looking forward to. So even though it's hard in the moment, it's always worth it after.
Huckman's painting was auctioned off in early March. She took home $30,000 from the auction. This was Huckman's 4th time entry into the art contest. The high schooler said when she first told her parents she wanted to go into art, they were unhappy about it.
They were like, that's not going to work out, like you're never going to make any money. But that was just at the very beginning when I was probably in middle school, and by now there's really nobody who's telling me like, oh, this isn't an option, because I think that every single year I've just done so well with art that I've kind of proved that it is a possible career path.
Huckman says she plans to attend Savannah College of Art Design in the future and pursue a career as a concept artist.